Welcome! Tonight, I invite you to leave the busy world behind and join me in a place of profound stillness. Imagine, if you will, that you are standing at the edge of a quiet, ancient forest. The canopy high above filters the sunlight into soft, dappled patches of gold and shadow. The air is cool, still, and carries the faint, sweet scent of rain-dampened earth and old wood. It is a place where the clock has no power, and the only rhythm is the slow, steady heartbeat of the natural world. Before we journey deeper into the secrets of this place, let's take a moment to settle. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. Hold it for just a second, and then let it out with a long, gentle sigh. Feel the weight of your body as it settles into your bed. Notice the points where you are supported, and let yourself sink just a little deeper into that comfort. Your jaw is relaxed, your shoulders are heavy, and the world outside is fading into a soft, distant hum. You are safe, you are comfortable, and you are ready to rest. As your eyes adjust to the dim light of the forest floor, you notice a vibrant emerald carpet spreading across the roots of the trees and the surfaces of the stones. This is the world of moss. It is a world that demands we slow down to truly see it. Mosses are among the most ancient inhabitants of our planet. They were some of the very first plants to ever leave the water and claim the land, appearing roughly 450 million years ago. When you look at a patch of moss, you're looking at a lineage that predates the dinosaurs, the flowering plants, and even many of the mountain ranges we know today. They have survived ice ages and mass extinctions, persisting in the quiet corners of the world with a patient, unyielding strength. Unlike the trees that tower over them, mosses are remarkably simple in their design. They do not have true roots to reach deep into the soil, nor do they produce seeds or vibrant flowers to catch the wind. They exist in a more primitive, yet highly effective form. They don't need the complexity of vascular systems to move water through tall stems. Instead, they live in close harmony with the moisture around them, absorbing what they need directly through their tiny, delicate leaves. They are the elders of the plant kingdom, guardians of the damp and the shaded. There is a profound sense of timelessness here on the forest floor. In the presence of these ancient plants, the rush of the hours and minutes seems to dissolve. Everything here is soft to the touch and quiet to the ear. We are stepping into a miniature landscape where a single square inch of green holds a history stretching back through the eons. As we linger here, we begin to notice the small details, the way the light catches the dew, and the way the moss cradles the earth in a protective, velvet embrace. It is a soft, living blanket that has covered the world for millions of years, waiting for us to notice its quiet beauty. Look closer now, past the towering trunks of the oaks and the pines, down to a single ancient granite stone resting in the deep shade. It is a sturdy, rounded rock, smoothed by centuries of rain and wind. Its surface is a mosaic of cool grays and flecks of white quartz, but mostly it is draped in a thick, vibrant mantle of green. This stone is a world unto itself, a miniature continent for the life that clings to it. The moss here is damp to the touch, holding on to the morning mist long after the sun has climbed high above the canopy. It feels like a living velvet, a cushion for the very earth. As we sit here by this quiet stone, if you find yourself drifting into a state of peace, you are always welcome to return. If you'd like to join us for more of these nightly journeys into the wonders of our world, please feel free to subscribe or leave a gentle like. It helps our quiet community grow, and it ensures that these stories of science and nature are here whenever you need to find your way back to sleep. But there is no need to move or change anything. Simply stay as you are and let my voice carry you further into the green. Scientists place these humble plants into a group called bryophytes. The name comes from the Greek words for moss and plant, and it encompasses a family of life that chooses simplicity over complexity. While most plants we see every day have evolved elaborate systems to pump water upward against gravity, the bryophytes have remained low to the ground, staying close to the source of their life. They are the poets of the plant world, finding beauty and resilience in the smallest of spaces. You might be surprised to learn that what we call moss is actually a vast and diverse kingdom. There are approximately 12,000 different species of moss scattered across the globe. Some prefer the frozen rocks of the Antarctic, while others thrive in the humid, misty cloud forests of the tropics. On this one granite stone alone, there might be 3 or 4 different types living side by side. Some looking like tiny prehistoric ferns, others like soft glowing stars, and some like dense dark carpets. Each species has its own way of catching the light and holding the rain, contributing to the rich tapestry of life that covers the stones and soil of our world. As we focus our attention on this single patch of green, the world around us seems to shrink. The distant sounds of the forest, the rustle of a leaf, the call of a bird become secondary to the quiet drama unfolding on the surface of this rock. We are moving from the grand scale of the forest down into the intricate, hidden architecture of the moss itself. It is a transition from the broad and the vast to the specific and the small, where every tiny filament has a purpose and every drop of water is a treasure. Imagine your mind becoming as small as a grain of sand, settling into the soft, cool valleys between these tiny emerald peaks. Here, time moves differently, and the air is always fresh and clean. As you settle into this miniature world, imagine reaching out a hand, not to pluck or disturb, but simply to feel. The surface of the moss is a marvel of texture. It is incredibly soft, yet it possesses a surprising resilience. When you press into it mentally, it gives way like a plush cushion, only to spring back slowly as you release. It feels cool to the touch, carrying the perpetual dampness of the deep woods, a refreshing chill that seems to emanate from the very heart of the stone. This coolness is a quiet invitation to let go of any lingering heat or tension in your own body, allowing your thoughts to become as still and as shaded as the forest floor itself. You might wonder how such a delicate, soft organism manages to cling so firmly to the hard, unforgiving surface of a granite boulder, even through heavy rains or rushing winds. The secret lies beneath the green canopy in structures known as rhizoids. These are not true roots in the way we usually think of them. Instead, they are tiny hair-like filaments, so fine they are almost invisible to the naked eye. These rhizoids act like thousands of microscopic anchors, winding their way into the tiniest pores and crevices of the rock. They don't push deep into the earth, they simply hold fast, tethering the moss to its home with a gentle but persistent grip. In the world of larger plants, like the towering pines or the sturdy oaks above us, roots serve two primary purposes. They provide stability, and they act as straws, drawing water and minerals up from the soil. But the moss has chosen a different path of evolution. Its rhizoids are purely for stability. They do not drink. They do not forage. They are simply the plant's way of staying grounded, a physical connection to the earth that requires very little energy to maintain. It is a beautiful lesson in simplicity, having exactly what you need to stay in place and nothing more. Because the rhizoids do not absorb nutrients, the moss must find another way to sustain itself. This is where the true elegance of its design revealed. Every part of the moss, every tiny translucent leaf, and every delicate stem is designed to breathe and drink directly from the environment. Nutrients and water are absorbed directly through the surface of the leaves. When the mist rolls through the trees or a light rain begins to fall, the moss doesn't wait for the water to reach the ground. It catches the moisture as it lands, drinking it in instantly through its thin, permeable skin. This method of living makes the moss incredibly sensitive and attuned to the world around it. It is in constant, direct contact with the air and the water, filtering the essence of the forest through its own green body. As you visualize this, imagine yourself also becoming more porous, letting the calmness of this quiet space move through you. Just as the moss absorbs the cool dampness of the morning, you can absorb the stillness of this moment. The physical structure of the moss is a testament to the power of being open to the world, of finding strength not in deep, hidden systems, but in a simple, direct relationship with the life-giving elements of light and water. The forest is quiet, the stone is steady, and the moss is perfectly, peacefully at home. Imagine a single, heavy raindrop falling from the high canopy of the trees above. It tumbles through the air, catching the dim light of the forest until it lands softly on the emerald cushion of the moss. In an instant, the water doesn't just sit on the surface. It is pulled inward, disappearing into the green fibers as if by magic. This is the moss's greatest talent. It is a living sponge, a master of hydration in a world that can sometimes be very dry. When you look at a patch of moss after a long period without rain, it might appear slightly shriveled, its colors muted to a dusty olive brown. It is waiting, patient and still. But the moment moisture touches it, a transformation begins. The moss literally swells with life. Some species are so incredibly efficient at this that they can absorb up to 20 times their own dry weight in water. To put that in perspective, imagine a small towel being able to hold gallons upon gallons of liquid without ever dripping. This incredible capacity to hold on to water allows the moss to survive in places where other plants would surely wither. It is a deep fundamental thirst that is quenched with a quiet, soaking grace. As the moss drinks, it becomes heavy and soft, like a velvet quilt draped over the stones and soil. This heaviness serves a vital purpose for the entire forest ecosystem. During a heavy storm, when the rain lashes down in torrents, the moss acts as a natural buffer. It soaks up the excess water, preventing it from rushing over the surface of the ground and washing away the precious topsoil. This process of preventing soil erosion is one of the moss's most important roles. By holding the earth in place, the moss protects the roots of the larger trees and the homes of the tiny creatures burrowed beneath. It is a quiet guardian of the landscape, ensuring that the foundation of the forest remains stable and secure through even the most violent weather. If you were to look even closer, perhaps with the aid of a magnifying glass, you would see why the moss is so good at this. Most of its leaves are incredibly delicate, often just one single cell layer thick. They are so thin that they are almost transparent, allowing water to pass through their membranes with almost no resistance. There are no complicated systems of veins or thick waxy coatings to get in the way. It is a direct, intimate exchange between the plant and the moisture in the air. This thinness also means that the moss is exceptionally light when it is dry, allowing it to cling to vertical surfaces and overhanging branches where heavier plants could never find a foothold. As you lie there, imagine that same sense of gentle saturation. Think of how the moss feels as it is finally quenched, every cell becoming plump and vibrant once again. There is no rush, no effort required. The moss simply opens itself to the rain and lets the water do the work. You can do the same with your own breath. With every slow inhale, imagine you are drawing in that same cool, refreshing moisture, filling your lungs with the clean, damp scent of the forest floor. And with every exhale, feel yourself settling deeper into your bed, becoming as heavy and relaxed as a moss-covered stone after a long, refreshing rain. The world is damp, the air is still, and the moss is satisfied. It has everything it needs to thrive in the quiet shadows, waiting for the first light of dawn to filter through the leaves above. In this state of total hydration, the moss is prepared for its next task, turning that water and the faint, dappled sunlight into the energy it needs to grow. As the moss rests, satisfied by the water it has gathered, it begins a quiet, almost invisible transformation. In the deep, dim shade of the forest floor, where the tall pines and ancient oaks block out most of the sun, the moss performs a quiet miracle. It is the miracle of photosynthesis, the process of turning light into life. But for the moss, this happens in a way that is uniquely patient and incredibly efficient. While other plants might struggle or stretch desperately toward the canopy in search of a stray beam of bright light, the moss is perfectly content in the half-light. It has adapted over millions of years to thrive in the shadows, becoming highly efficient at low-light photosynthesis. It can capture the smallest fragments of energy, the dim, green-tinted light that filters through the leaves above, and turn it into the sugars it needs to survive. It does not need the glare of the noon sun. It is a creature of the gloaming, steady, and sure in its quiet work. Imagine that soft emerald glow as the moss begins to process the day's meager light. It is a slow, rhythmic pulse of energy. Because the moss doesn't have to spend its resources building tall trunks or deep roots, it can focus entirely on its delicate green surfaces. This efficiency is what allows it to carpet the darkest corners of the woods where nothing else can grow. Even in the depths of winter, when the forest is buried under a heavy, silent blanket of snow, the moss does not truly sleep. While the deciduous trees have dropped their leaves and the flowers have retreated into the earth as seeds, the moss can stay green and active. If a little light can penetrate the crystalline structure of the snow, the moss continues its work. Underneath that cold white insulation, the moss remains a vibrant, living presence, waiting for the thaw with a quiet, unyielding persistence. As you breathe in the cool, still air of your room, think of the moss doing the same in its miniature world. Every tiny leaf is a miniature oxygen factory. Just like the towering giants above them, these small emerald patches are constantly breathing life into the atmosphere. On a miniature scale, they produce the very oxygen we rely on, contributing their small but vital share to the breath of the planet. It is a beautiful, reciprocal relationship. The forest provides the shade the moss loves, and the moss, in turn, helps refresh the air for every creature that wanders through the trees. This cycle of light and energy is peaceful and constant, a steady hum of life that requires no effort, only presence. The moss is a master of making much from very little. It takes the water from the mist, the dim light from the shadows, and the stillness of the forest floor to build its soft, resilient kingdom. It is a reminder that there is great power in being small and patient. You don't need to rush to find the light. Sometimes the light will find you, even in the deepest shade. And like the moss under the snow, you can remain tucked away, safe and quiet, while the world outside continues its busy pace. Here, in the dimness of the evening, you are just like that moss, settled, supported, and gently processing the day in a way that is calm and restorative. But as we look closer at our damp granite stone, we see that the moss is not the only resident of this ancient surface. There is another presence here, something even more patient and perhaps even more mysterious. It clings to the rock in flat, colorful patches that look like spilled paint or aged parchment. This is the lichen, a being that tells a different story of survival, one of a partnership so deep it blurs the lines between two different worlds. While the moss is a plant, the lichen is something else entirely, a quiet pioneer that has mastered the art of living on the very edge of possibility. If you lean in closer to that same damp granite stone, your eyes might drift away from the soft, velvet tufts of moss to something flatter, firmer, and more colorful. It looks almost like a dusting of pale gray flour, or perhaps a splash of dried orange paint clinging tightly to the hard surface of the rock. This is the lichen, the moss's quiet neighbor. While the moss feels like a plush carpet beneath a miniature foot, the lichen feels more like a crust, a seasoned layer of history etched directly into the mineral heart of the stone. At first glance, you might think the lichen is just another type of small plant, but it is actually one of the most fascinating mysteries of the natural world. Lichens are not plants at all. In fact, they aren't even a single organism. They are what scientists call composite organisms, a living masterpiece created by two and sometimes three entirely different life forms working as one. They represent a way of being that is completely different from the trees or the flowers we see every day. They are a community functioning as a single steady pulse of life. Imagine a partnership so perfect that it becomes a new identity. A lichen is a symbiotic marriage between a fungus and an alga, or sometimes a cyanobacteria. They are woven together so tightly that they cannot be easily separated without the whole structure dissolving. In this quiet, ancient arrangement, each partner has a specific, vital role to play, ensuring that the whole can thrive where the individual parts would surely perish. They have found a way to bridge the gap between different kingdoms of life to create something entirely unique. The fungus acts as the architect and the protector of this tiny world. It provides the physical structure, the tiny tough fibers that anchor the lichen to the stone and shield the interior from the harsh sun and the drying wind. It is the house, sturdy and resilient, holding on to the moisture that both partners need to survive. The fungus is also responsible for collecting minerals from the environment, reaching into the microscopic cracks of the rock. But the fungus cannot make its own food. It lacks the green machinery of photosynthesis. For that, it relies entirely on its partner. Tucked safely inside those fungal walls, the microscopic algae or cyanobacteria capture the gentle sunlight filtering through the forest canopy. Through the quiet process of photosynthesis, the algae turn that light and carbon dioxide into energy, creating the sugars and carbohydrates that feed both themselves and the fungus that shelters them. The fungus provides the structure, the mineral nutrients, and the protection. The algae provides the food. It is a beautiful, silent exchange, a life of mutual support that has lasted for hundreds of millions of years. This partnership is one of nature's greatest success stories. Because they work together so harmoniously, lichens can survive in places where neither the fungus nor the algae could ever live alone. They can cling to the barest, driest rocks, enduring freezing cold and scorching heat that would wither almost any other living thing. They don't need soil, and they don't need much water. They only need each other. As you settle deeper into your pillows and feel the weight of your limbs, let the thought of this quiet cooperation soothe you. It is a reminder that even in the simplest corners of the world, there is a deep and profound strength in connection. The lichen doesn't struggle against the stone. It simply settles in, a woven tapestry of life that has mastered the art of being patient, resilient, and entirely at peace with its surroundings. It sits there, a colorful crust on the granite, watching the centuries pass with the stillness that is almost impossible for us to imagine. It is the ultimate expression of a life lived in perfect, unhurried balance. Imagine, for a moment, the stone beneath the moss again. On its surface, you might see a circular patch of lichen, a pale green, orange, or dusty gray map of a world that moves at a different speed than our own, while the trees above grow taller each summer and the moss spreads its soft carpet over the damp earth after a single rainstorm. The lichen is content to wait. It is the master of what we might call slow time. When we think of growth, we often imagine the rapid unfurling of a leaf or the quick sprout of a seedling after a spring shower. But for the lichen, growth is measured in decades and centuries rather than weeks. Most species of lichen grow incredibly slowly. often expanding by less than a single millimeter in an entire year. To the human eye, a lichen on a rock looks the same today as it did 10 years ago. It does not rush. It does not compete for space with a frantic energy. It simply persists, adding a tiny microscopic fraction of its body to the outer edge of its circle, year after quiet year. A patch the size of your palm may have been sitting on that stone since before your grandparents were born. This patient pace allows them to endure where others cannot. In the harshest, most unforgiving environments on Earth, where the wind is a constant roar and the ground remains frozen for most of the year, this slowness becomes a superpower. In the vast open stretches of the Arctic, researchers have discovered lichen colonies that have been clinging to the same boulders for over 8,000 years. Think of that duration for a moment as you let your breath move in and out, slow and steady. When those specific lichens were just beginning to form their first tiny crusts on the stone, the great pyramids of Egypt had not yet been built. Human history was in its infancy. Entire civilizations have risen, flourished, and faded into the soil, while a single patch of lichen continued its silent expansion across a piece of granite. They are among the oldest living things on our planet, surviving through ice ages and heat waves, through volcanic ash and the shifting of continents. They represent a form of longevity that is difficult for our busy minds to grasp. They remind us that there is another way to exist, one that doesn't require constant movement or rapid change. As you lie here, safe and warm, try to align your own rhythm with the heartbeat of the lichen. There is no hurry. There is no pressure to achieve or to move. Like the lichen on the stone, you're allowed to simply be. You are part of a world that has been turning for billions of years, and right now, your only task is to settle into this ancient stillness. The forest is patient, the stone is patient, and the lichen, in its 8,000-year-old wisdom, knows that everything happens in its own perfect, unhurried time. Feel the weight of the day lifting, replaced by the heavy, comforting sense of deep time, the kind of time that turns mountains into scent and lichens into legends. This slowness is a gift, a chance to let go of the fast-moving world and drift into the quiet, enduring peace of the ancient earth. As you gaze at this ancient, slow-growing life, you might notice that it isn't just one simple shade of green. The lichen paints the stone in a palette of unexpected, muted hues, creating a living mosaic that shifts with the light. There are patches of pale mint, soft and cooling to the eye, like a gentle mist caught on the rock. Next to them, you might see a burst of bright, sun-kissed orange, a warm glow that stands out against the dark granite. And in the shadows, there are the dusty charcoal grays and silver whites, looking like fine lace or a dusting of frost that never melts. These colors are more than just a beautiful display. They are a glimpse into the complex, invisible world of lichen chemistry. Within these small, humble organisms, a silent laboratory is at work. Scientists have discovered that lichens produce over 800 unique chemical compounds, substances that are found nowhere else in the natural world. These are not merely byproducts of growth. They are carefully crafted tools for survival. Some of these compounds act as a natural sunscreen. Because many lichens live in exposed places, clinging to the tops of mountain peaks or the bare branches of trees, they are constantly bombarded by the sun's harsh ultraviolet rays. To protect their delicate internal layers, they produce pigments that absorb this radiation, shielding the algae within just as we might use a parasol on a bright afternoon. Other chemicals are designed to be incredibly bitter or even toxic to tiny herbivores. A hungry snail or a wandering insect might take one small taste of the lichen and find it so unpalatable that they move on, leaving the slow-growing colony in peace. It is a quiet chemical fortress, defending itself without ever moving an inch. There is a particular kind of magic that happens when the weather changes. If you were to watch a patch of dusty gray lichen during a rainstorm, you would see a transformation that feels almost like a slow-motion miracle. When the lichen is dry, its outer fungal layer is opaque and brittle, hiding the life beneath. But as the first drops of cool rain begin to fall, the lichen drinks deeply. It is hygroscopic, pulling moisture from the air and the stone. As it saturates, the outer layer becomes translucent, like a window being wiped clean. Suddenly, the dull grays and browns vanish, and the lichen turns a vibrant, brilliant green. This is the color of the algae inside, waking up and beginning to breathe as the water reaches them. In a matter of minutes, the crust on the stone transforms into a lush emerald jewel, shimmering with life. It is as if the lichen is exhaling, relaxing into the dampness, and readying itself for a brief, energetic burst of growth. This visual variety is a testament to the lichen's resilience. Whether it is reflecting the sun with its pale shields or glowing green in the rain, every color and every compound serves the purpose of enduring. As you listen to the rhythmic sound of your own breathing, imagine those colors shifting ever so slowly on the surface of the stone. The mint, the orange, the gray, all of them are part of a quiet, chemical dance that has been perfected over millions of years. The lichen is a master of its environment, using its own internal chemistry to stay safe, stay fed, and stay beautiful in the face of the elements. It is a patient, colorful sentinel, waiting for the next drop of rain to reveal its hidden, vibrant heart. While the lichen sits so still on its granite perch, a quiet, invisible process is unfolding beneath its surface. It isn't just resting on the stone. In a very real, very slow sense, the lichen is consuming it. If you were to look through a powerful lens at the place where the lichen meets the rock, you would see a frontier of transformation. Inside that thin, colorful crust, the lichen is busy producing specialized organic acids. These are not harsh or volatile chemicals, but rather a gentle, persistent chemistry designed for the long term. Microscopic droplets of these acids seep downward, finding the tiniest fissures and microscopic pores in the hard granite. They work their way into the crystalline structure of the rock, softening the bonds that have held it together for millions of years. This patient, chemical embrace is a process known as biological weathering. It is one of the most fundamental forces on our planet, yet it happens in total peaceful silence. The lichen doesn't have teeth or claws, but its chemistry is more powerful than the wind or the rain. Bit by bit, the acids dissolve the minerals that form the stone, the quartz, the feldspar, and the mica. The rock, which seems so eternal and unyielding to our touch, begins to surrender to the lichen's slow, steady progress. As the minerals in the stone are released, they mix with the microscopic debris of the lichen itself. Tiny fragments of fungus and algae that have lived their lives and returned to the surface. Over decades and then centuries, this mixture begins to accumulate in the cracks of the rock. It is the birth of something new. This is how the very first layers of soil are created on a barren landscape. Imagine a world made only of bare gray stone fresh from the fires of a volcano or the crushing weight of a glacier. Nothing can grow there. There is no place for a seed to take root, no nutrients to sustain a leaf. But then the lichen arrives, carried on a stray breeze. It settles, it clings, and it begins its work. By the time the lichen is finished, centuries later, it has transformed the surface of that rock into a thin, dark veil of earth. This makes the lichen a true pioneer of the natural world. They are the first to arrive and the last to leave. They are the architects of the forest floor, preparing the way for the mosses, the ferns, and eventually the great trees. They do the heavy, slow work of dismantling the world of stone so that a world of green can flourish. As you settle deeper into your covers, think of this incredible patience. The lichen is never in a hurry. It understands that the greatest changes often come from the smallest, most consistent actions. It is a quiet labor of love, building the foundation of life, one dissolved mineral at a time. On our single, damp stone in the forest, this process is happening right now. The lichen is anchored firmly, its roots of chemistry reaching deep into the granite, turning the hard, cold surface into a cradle for the future. It is a reminder that even the strongest things can be softened by time and steady, gentle pressure. And as the lichen works, it takes on many different forms, decorating the rock like a gallery of living art, each shape a different strategy for surviving on the edge of the world. As you look closer at our ancient damp stone, you might start to see that the lichen isn't just a single uniform layer. It is a diverse landscape, a miniature world that mirrors the complexity of a coral reef, but built on land in the quiet shade of the forest. If you were to shrink down to the size of a ladybug, this rock would not look like a flat surface. It would look like a mountain range covered in strange and beautiful vegetation. Botanists have categorized these various shapes into three main groups, and we can find examples of each one right here, clinging to the granite. First, there are the crustose lichens. Their name comes from the word crust, and they live up to it perfectly. These are the ones that are fused so tightly to the rock that they seem to be a part of the stone itself. They look like splashes of dried paint, shades of pale gray, dusty yellow, or even a deep rusty orange. You couldn't peel a crustose lichen off the rock if you tried. They are inseparable, sharing a destiny with the mineral surface they inhabit. They grow in flat, cracked patches, like the bed of a dried-out lake, enduring the harshest winds and the hottest sun by staying as low as possible. There is a profound security in their flatness, a refusal to be moved by the world. Then, as your eyes wander across the stone, you might find the foliose lichens. These are a bit more adventurous. Folus comes from the same root as foliage, and these lichens truly do look like tiny wrinkled leaves. They have a distinct knot and bottom, and unlike the crusted variety, they only attach to the rock at certain points. Their edges often curl upward, looking like the ruffled hem of a garment or a scattering of tiny green parchment fragments. They have a paper-like texture when they are dry, but when the forest mist touches them, they soften and expand, turning a vibrant, lush emerald. They create a bit of depth on the stone, casting microscopic shadows that offer shelter to even smaller forms of life. Finally, there are the fruticose lichens, the most elaborate of them all. These are the shrubby lichens. They don't lay flat at all. Instead, they stand upright or hang down like tiny tangled tresses of hair. Some look like miniature leafless bushes, while others resemble delicate, hollow tubes or branching antlers. They are the skyscrapers of the lichen world, reaching out into the air to catch every bit of moisture and light they can find. One of the most famous fruticose lichens is Old Man's Beard, which hangs from tree branches in long silvery green strands. But on our stone, they might look like tiny upright cups or fine golden threads. Each of these forms, the crust, the leaf, and the shrub, is a different way of being, a different way of solving the puzzle of survival. Together, they turn our single stone into a living tapestry, a mosaic of shapes and colors that have been slowly arranging themselves for decades. They aren't competing for space so much as they are sharing it, each one finding its own niche, its own little corner of the rock to call home. As you breathe in the cool, damp air of this imaginary forest, let the variety of these shapes soothe your mind. There is room for everything here. There is a place for the flat and steady, a place for the curled and leafy, and a place for the tall and reaching. Everything is in its right place, resting on the silent, supportive weight of the stone. As you contemplate this tapestry of life on the stone, take a moment to notice your own body. Let your jaw soften, releasing any tension you might be holding there. Feel your shoulders drop away from your ears, becoming heavy and relaxed. The forest around us is so still, so quiet, that the only sound is the soft, rhythmic rustle of the wind far above in the high canopy. Down here, near the moss and the lichen, everything is hushed and peaceful. You are safe here, resting in the cool, filtered light of the afternoon. Looking closely at the surface of the granite, you see that the mosses and lichens don't just sit side by side. They weave together in a complex, beautiful mosaic. A patch of soft emerald moss might give way to a silvery gray lichen, which then yields to a bright orange crust. They are like pieces of a living puzzle that have grown to fit perfectly together over the years. This isn't a battle for territory, but a shared existence. By growing together in this intricate mosaic, they cover every inch of the rock, protecting the stone and each other from the harshness of the outside world. This dense, interlocked carpet of life does something truly remarkable. It creates its own weather system, a tiny world within our world. Scientists call this a microclimate because the structures of the moss and lichen are so compact and complex, they trap a thin layer of air right against the surface of the stone. This layer of air acts as a natural form of insulation, keeping the temperature remarkably stable. Even when the summer sun beats down on the forest floor, the heart of the moss remains cool and damp. When the night frost creeps through the trees, the mosaic holds on to a lingering warmth. It regulates moisture with incredible efficiency, holding on to every drop of dew or mist, creating a humid sanctuary that persists long after the surrounding forest has dried out. This stable, protected environment is absolutely essential for the miniature jungle that lives inside these layers. To us, it looks like a simple, soft cushion, but to a microscopic creature, it is a vast, ancient wilderness. This microclimate provides the perfect conditions for life to flourish on a scale we rarely stop to consider. Within these layers of green and gray, there is a hidden world, a miniature empire teeming with activity, sheltered from the wind and the sun by the very plants they call home. It is a sanctuary of moisture and deep shadow, a place where the rules of the larger world don't quite apply. Imagine yourself shrinking down, becoming smaller than a grain of sand, until you are standing at the edge of this mossy forest. The tiny, translucent leaves of the moss now tower over you like giant prehistoric ferns, and the tangled threads of the lichen look like ancient gnarled trees reaching toward a distant sky. We are about to step into this hidden landscape, a place where thousands of tiny lives unfold in the space of a single footprint, all of them cradled by the silence of the stone. As you stand there, shrunken down to the size of a speck of dust, the world above disappears entirely. The towering trunks of the moss plants rise up around you, their delicate, translucent leaves overlapping like the scales of a mythical creature. To your eyes now, these aren't just tiny plants. They are the best emerald canopy, a soaring forest that stretches out in every direction. The light that filters through is soft and green, diffused by the moisture in the air, creating a dim, peaceful twilight that never truly fades. It is a quiet, rhythmic world where the only sound is the slow, steady drip of a single bead of dew sliding down a leaf, a sound that feels as deep and resonant as a bell in this miniature cathedral. In this hidden wilderness, space is used with incredible efficiency. While a square meter of the forest floor above might feel quiet and still, down here it is a bustling metropolis. It is estimated that a single square meter of healthy moss can be home to over 100,000 tiny invertebrates. It is one of the most densely populated habitats on our planet, a hidden empire where every crevice and every leaf fold is a home. These creatures are the true citizens of the moss, living out entire lifetimes in a space no larger than the palm of your hand. Yet, to them, it is a continent of endless opportunity and shelter. Among the most common residents you might encounter in this green shade are the springtails. These tiny wingless creatures are the acrobats of the moss forest. They are named for a unique fork-like appendage tucked under their bodies, held in place like a loaded spring. When they need to move quickly, they release this mechanism, launching themselves into the air with an effortless, silent grace. A springtail can jump over 100 times its own body length in a single bound, an extraordinary feat of agility that allows them to navigate the dense, tangled jungle of the moss canopy in the blink of an eye. You might see them as tiny silver blue flecks, appearing and disappearing among the stalks like ghosts in the greenery. But the springtails aren't just here for the spectacle of their movement. They play a vital role in the health of this miniature ecosystem. Along with many other tiny inhabitants, they are the forest's primary recyclers. They spend their days wandering through the damp shadows, feeding on decaying organic matter, fungi, and microscopic bacteria. By breaking down these materials, they release essential nutrients back into the moss, ensuring that the trees of this tiny forest have everything they need to stay vibrant and green. They are the quiet workers, the invisible gardeners, who keep the world of the moss in perfect balance, turning the old into the new with tireless patience. As you watch a springtail disappear into the green shadows with a sudden, silent leap, you realize that this forest is even deeper and more complex than it first appeared. The further you look, the more layers of life you begin to see. Hidden among these busy recyclers are even smaller, stranger beings. Creatures that move with a slow, deliberate grace through the thin films of water that coat every leaf like a shimmering ocean. In the quietest corners of the moss, where the moisture is deepest and the shadows are longest, lives perhaps the most famous and resilient resident of all. A creature that seems to belong to another world entirely. As the frantic energy of the jumping springtails fades into the background, we find ourselves looking even closer, descending into the truly microscopic layers of this green world. Here, the pace of life changes. It becomes slower, more rhythmic, and infinitely more patient. In the tiny shimmering pools of water that gather where a moss leaf meets the stem, lives perhaps the most famous and beloved resident of this miniature forest, the tardigrade. You might know them by their more whimsical name, the water bears. The name water bear is remarkably fitting. When viewed through a lens, these microscopic creatures have a surprisingly plump, endearing appearance. Their bodies are segmented and sturdy, supported by 4 pairs of stubby little legs, 8 legs in total, each ending in a set of tiny, delicate claws. They move with a slow, lumbering gait that looks very much like the walk of a tiny, translucent bear wandering through a forest of green stalks. They are so small that they are almost invisible to the naked eye, yet they are complex, multicellular animals, perfectly designed for their life in the damp shadows. To a tardigrade, the thin film of water coating a moss leaf is not just a damp surface. It is a vast, shimmering ocean. They spend their lives submerged in this liquid world, using their 8 legs to paddle and crawl through the microscopic droplets. They move with a quiet, unhurried grace, navigating the landscape of the moss as if they have all the time in the universe. And in a way, perhaps they do. The water bear is legendary not just for its appearance, but for its almost mythic resilience. They are widely considered to be among the most indestructible creatures on our planet. In the safety of their mossy home, they lead peaceful lives, but they carry within them a biological strength that defies imagination. Scientists have tested the limits of these tiny beings and found that they can survive conditions that would be fatal to almost any other form of life. They can endure the crushing pressures of the deepest ocean trenches and the searing heat of boiling water. They can be frozen to temperatures close to absolute zero, where all molecular motion nearly stops, only to walk away unharmed when they are warmed back up. Most incredibly, the tardigrade is the first known animal to have survived exposure to the vacuum of outer space. In specialized missions, these tiny explorers were carried beyond our atmosphere, exposed to the cold, airless void and the intense radiation of the sun. And yet, when they were brought back to Earth and returned to their damp, mossy cushions, they simply continued their lives as if nothing had happened. There is something deeply comforting about the existence of the water bear. In this quiet forest, on this single stone, lives a creature that embodies the very essence of endurance. They are the tiny, silent guardians of the moss, proof that life can find a way to persist through the most extreme challenges the universe can offer. As they lumber slowly through their microscopic dewdrops, gripping the moss fibers with their 8 little feet, they remind us of the incredible strength found in small things. They do not hurry. They do not struggle. They simply exist, moving through their green world with a sturdy, ancient patience, perfectly at home in the damp, cool embrace of the moss. But this legendary resilience isn't just a passive trait. It is the result of a secret, hidden ability that allows them to wait out the harshest of times in a way that seems almost like magic. But what happens when the rain stops and the gentle humidity of the morning begins to fade? As the sun climbs higher, filtering through the leafy canopy above, the moss on our granite stone begins to lose its moisture. To us, it might just look a little darker, a little more brittle, but to the tiny creatures living within it, this is a monumental shift in their world. Yet the water bear does not panic. It has a secret, a profound biological strategy that allows it to navigate these dry spells with a grace that seems almost supernatural. This secret is the tune state. When the moss dries out, the tardigrade undergoes a transformation called cryptobiosis. The word itself sounds like a lullaby, hidden life. As the last traces of liquid water vanish from the moss leaves, the tardigrade carefully pulls its 8 legs inside its body, tucks its head in, and curls into a tiny dried-out ball. In this state, it is no longer an active animal. It is a tune, a microscopic speck of life that has essentially paused its own existence. It is a form of deep biological sleep that makes our own nightly rest seem like a brief, flickering nap. In this state of suspended animation, the tardigrade's metabolism slows down to less than 0.01% of its normal rate. It can lose an incredible 97% of its body water, becoming so dry that it could be mistaken for a grain of sand or a bit of dust. It is in this tune state that the water bear achieves its legendary invincibility. It can remain dormant like this for years. Some scientists believe for many decades, waiting with a patience that the rest of the animal kingdom cannot fathom. It is as if the clock of its life has simply stopped ticking, waiting for the right moment to start again. There is a quiet beauty in this waiting. The moss may stay dry for months, turning brown and crunchy under the summer sun, but deep within its fibers, thousands of these tiny tons are cradled, safe and still. They do not age. They do not hunger. They simply exist in the silence, a testament to the endurance of life. And then, eventually, the weather shifts. The clouds gather, the air grows heavy and cool, and a single heavy drop of rain falls onto the stone, then another and another. As the moss drinks in the water, swelling and turning vibrant green once more, the miracle of the reawakening begins. It is a process that happens with startling speed. Within just a few minutes of being touched by water, the tun begins to absorb the moisture. It swells, its skin becomes supple again, and its 8 tiny legs unfold. Almost as quickly as it went to sleep, the water bear is back. It begins to move, unhurried and as if no time had passed at all. It simply continues its journey through the damp forest of the moss, ready to feed and explore once more. This cycle of drying and wetting, of sleeping and waking, is the heartbeat of the moss ecosystem. It is a rhythm of resilience that allows the smallest of creatures to survive in a world that is constantly changing. But the water bear is not the only resident of this emerald world who has learned how to navigate the challenges of life on a stone. If we look even closer, peering past the sturdy tardigrades, we find that the moss is home to an entire cast of characters, each with their own specialized ways of hunting, feeding, and thriving in the quiet shadows of the green. As the water bear stirs and begins its slow trek across the moss leaf, we realize it is not alone in this emerald wilderness. The moss is a vast, interconnected city, and the tardigrade is just one resident among many. There are other hunters, other grazers, and other wanderers, all coexisting in the damp, cool shade of the green canopy. If we were to look through a lens that could see the invisible, we would discover a world as complex and as vibrant as any tropical rainforest, but contained within a space no larger than a single thumbprint. Among the most fascinating of these tiny inhabitants are the rotifers. Their name comes from a Latin word meaning wheelbearer, and when you see them under a microscope, you can understand why. At the head of a rotifer are 2 rings of tiny, hair-like structures called cilia. These cilia beat in a rhythmic, coordinated wave, creating the illusion of 2 spinning wheels. It is a mesmerizing sight, like the gears of a tiny living clock. These wheels serve a dual purpose. They act as little propellers, allowing the rotifer to swim through the film of water on the moss, and they also create miniature whirlpools. These gentle currents draw in even smaller particles of food, bits of organic matter or tiny bacteria, which the rotifer then consumes. They are the quiet janitors and filter feeders of the moss, pulsing with a steady, mechanical grace. Then, moving through the deeper layers of the moss, where the stems meet the soil, we find the nematodes. Often called roundworms, these creatures are incredibly simple in shape, long, translucent, and smooth, yet they are some of the most successful animals on our planet. In the moss forest, they act as the silent patrollers. They glide through the moisture with a rhythmic serpentine motion, winding their way between the moss leaves in search of their next meal. Many nematodes are specialists, feeding exclusively on the bacteria that break down decaying plant matter. By doing so, they help regulate the microscopic environment, ensuring that the bacterial populations stay in balance. They are like the invisible gardeners of this tiny world, keeping everything tidy and functioning as it should. It is incredible to consider that within a patch of moss no bigger than a small coin, a complete and complex food web is unfolding every single day. There are the producers, the moss itself, turning sunlight into energy. There are the grazers, like the rotifers and certain species of tardigrades. And then there are the hunters, like the predatory nematodes or even tiny mites that prowl the mossy stalks. It is a miniature jungle, governed by the same laws of nature that rule the Great Plains or the deep oceans, but it happens in total hushed silence. Every creature has its place, and every movement is part of a larger ancient rhythm. As we imagine these tiny lives unfolding, we can feel a sense of peace in the scale of it all. Us. There is a whole universe beneath our feet, or perhaps on the surface of a single stone, that requires nothing from us but our quiet appreciation. The moss provides the stage, the shelter, and the sustenance for these millions of tiny souls. It is a nurturing environment, a soft cradle for life that has endured for hundreds of millions of years. And just as the inhabitants of the moss have found clever ways to survive and thrive, the moss itself has developed its own remarkable methods for ensuring that its green carpet continues to spread season after season across the stones and the soil of the forest floor. To do this, it must look beyond its own leaves and find a way to cast its legacy into the wind. Unlike the wildflowers that might bloom nearby in the spring, or the towering trees that drop heavy acorns and winged maple seeds, the moss has a much older, more subtle way of beginning its next generation. It does not use colorful petals to attract bees, nor does it rely on bright fruits to be carried away by birds. Instead, it uses a method that predates the very first dinosaur, a method of ancient simplicity and incredible efficiency. It is a process that feels as quiet and patient as the moss itself, unfolding in a timeline that respects the stillness of the forest. If you were to lean in very close to a patch of moss during certain times of the year, perhaps resting your chin near the cool surface of that granite stone, you would notice something different about its texture. Rising up from the soft emerald cushions are hundreds of tiny, delicate threads, so fine they look like strands of silk. These are the stalks, known to scientists as the seta. They are often a different color than the moss itself, sometimes a deep earthy red, a pale gold, or a translucent lime green. They look like a forest of microscopic masts, swaying ever so slightly in the lightest breath of air, reaching upward away from the damp earth. At the very tip of each of these slender stalks sits a small, nodding head. This is the sporangium, or the spore capsule. It is a tiny, elegant vessel, often shaped like a pear, a teardrop, or a little rounded cup with a pointed cap. Inside this capsule, the moss is busy preparing its future. Thousands upon thousands of microscopic spores are being packed away, each one a tiny speck of life, lighter than a grain of dust. These spores are the moss's version of seeds, but they are much more primitive and far more numerous. While a tree might produce a few thousand seeds in a season, a single patch of moss can release millions of spores into the world. The seta serves a very specific and vital purpose in this journey. By lifting the capsule high above the green leaves of the moss colony, it ensures that the spores are positioned where they can catch the wind. Down on the forest floor, nestled among the leaves, the air is often still and heavy with moisture, trapped by the moss's own absorbent structure. But just a few millimeters higher, there are tiny currents of air, micro breezes, that can carry something as light as a spore for miles. It is a masterful piece of biological engineering designed to give these tiny travelers the best possible start. When the time is exactly right and the air reaches the perfect level of dryness, a remarkable event occurs. The capsule, which has been sealed tight to protect the developing spores from the rain, reaches its breaking point. The outer cap of the capsule, called the operculum, begins to loosen. In a movement so small and quiet, it is almost impossible to see with the naked eye. The cap is shed. Sometimes this happens with a tiny silent pop as the internal pressure of the drying capsule forces the lid off, revealing the treasure within. Once the lid is gone, the spores are ready for their great adventure. They do not simply spill out all at once. They wait for the world to come and find them. As the seta sways in the breeze, the capsule acts like a miniature salt shaker, casting those thousands of tiny spores into the air. They are so light that they do not fall toward the earth immediately. Instead, they drift. They float through the shafts of golden sunlight that pierce the forest canopy, looking like shimmering motes of dust dancing in the air. Some of these spores will land only a few inches away, settling back into the velvet folds of the mother colony to help it expand across its stone. But others will be caught by a stronger gust and carried far beyond the shadows of the forest, over hills and across rivers, perhaps landing in a distant, shady nook, or on a fallen log miles away. Wherever they land, if there's a bit of moisture and a sliver of shade, a new green carpet will begin to grow. It is a slow, patient dispersal, a silent scattering of life that ensures the moss will always find a place to thrive. But as simple as this process sounds, there is a hidden level of mechanical brilliance within that tiny capsule. The moss does not leave the release of its spores entirely to chance. It has a way of sensing the world around it, ensuring that its legacy is only cast out when the conditions are perfect for travel. This precision is managed by a structure so delicate and responsive that it seems almost to be breathing with the forest itself. As we look even closer at the tip of that tiny capsule, past where the lid has fallen away, we discover one of nature's most beautiful and precise pieces of engineering. It is a structure called the peristome. To our eyes, it looks like nothing more than a speck of dust, but under a lens, it reveals itself as a ring of exquisite, pointed teeth surrounding the opening of the capsule. These teeth are not for eating, of course. They are for timing. They act as a sophisticated gatekeeper, a biological valve that controls exactly when the moss's future generations are allowed to take flight into the forest air. These tiny teeth are incredibly sensitive to the moisture in the world around them. They are what scientists call hygroscopic, meaning they move and change shape automatically in response to humidity. When the air is damp, or when a soft mist rolls through the trees, the teeth absorb a microscopic amount of water and begin to swell. As they swell, they curve inward, interlocking like the fingers of two hands coming together. This movement seals the capsule shut, keeping the spores inside safe and dry during the rain. You might wonder why the moss would close its doors when there is plenty of water around. After all, most plants love the rain. But for a spore, moisture is a heavy burden. If the spores were released during a rainstorm, they would become damp and clumpy, falling straight to the ground beneath the mother plant. They wouldn't be able to catch the wind. They wouldn't be able to find new homes far away. So the moss waits. It remains patient, its tiny teeth locked tight against the humid air, holding its breath until the world dries out just a little bit more. As the sun begins to peek through the canopy and the morning mist starts to evaporate, the air becomes lighter and drier. Sensing this change, the teeth of the peristome begin to lose their moisture. They slowly uncurl, pulling back from the center of the capsule and opening the gateway to the world outside. This is the mechanical brilliance of the moss. It doesn't need a brain or a nervous system to make this decision. The very physical structure of its cells is tuned to the rhythm of the atmosphere. When the teeth are fully open, the spores are free to be whisked away by the slightest movement of air. Because the air is dry, the spores are at their lightest, drifting like microscopic feathers on the forest's breath. This ensures that they have the best possible chance to travel long distances, floating over the forest floor until they find that perfect, quiet spot to begin their own journey. It is a silent, rhythmic dance, opening in the dry warmth, closing in the cool damp, that has been happening on the bark of trees and the faces of stones for hundreds of millions of years. This level of precision, tucked away in a plant that many of us walk past without a second thought, reminds us of the complexity hidden in the smallest corners of our world. Everything in the forest has its own pace, its own set of rules for survival, and its own quiet way of ensuring life continues. While the moss uses these mechanical teeth to cast its legacy into the wind, its neighbor on the stone, the lichen, has developed an entirely different strategy for moving through the world, one that is just as patient and just as enduring. For the lichen, reproduction is a double challenge because it is a double organism. While the moss we just observed is a single plant with a single set of needs, the lichen is a partnership, a quiet marriage between a fungus and an inhabitant that provides food, such as algae or cyanobacteria. This duality creates a unique problem. If the lichen were to simply release fungal spores into the wind, those spores would land in the vastness of the forest and have to search for the exact right species of algae to bond with. It would be a difficult search, and most of those lonely spores would never find their partner. Without that partner, the fungus cannot build its home or feed itself, and it would simply fade away. To overcome this, the lichen has developed a remarkably clever and patient strategy for moving through the world together. It creates tiny specialized bundles called soradia. If you were to lean in very close to the surface of the lichen on our granite stone, you might notice areas that look slightly granular or even dusty, as if a fine powder had been sprinkled over the green and gray crust. These are the soradiae. Each one of these microscopic grains is a perfect miniature version of the parent lichen. It is a tiny travel kit containing a few strands of fungal hyphae wrapped protectively around a small cluster of algae cells. By packing both partners into one tiny package, the lichen ensures that wherever the fungus goes, its source of life and energy goes too. It is as if the lichen is sending out thousands of little escape pods, each one fully equipped with everything it needs to start a new life on a distant branch or a neighboring stone. This process is a form of asexual fragmentation. It doesn't require the complex meeting of different individual cells. It is simply a piece of the whole breaking away to become something new. The way these Sauroidea are released is just as gentle as the rest of the lichen's life. They are not launched with force. Instead, they wait for the world to move them. A soft gust of wind might lift them from the surface, or a heavy drop of rain might splash them onto a new surface. Sometimes, a small beetle or a bird landing on the stone might pick up a few of these grains on its feet and carry them to a new part of the forest. Because they are so light and so small, they can drift through the air like invisible dust, traveling for miles across the landscape. When a Sauroideum finally lands, it doesn't need to go looking for anything. The fungus and the algae are already together, ready to begin the slow work of anchoring themselves and building a new colony. This ensures the survival of the partnership across generations, allowing the lichen to spread its quiet presence across the world, one tiny fragment at a time. Both the moss and the lichen are masters of this patient expansion, using the wind and the rain to carry their legacy to the future. They have spent millions of years perfecting the art of waiting for the right moment. And as we sit here in the quiet of the forest, we can see that this patience extends to every part of their existence, even to the way they handle the harshest of times when the water disappears and the world turns dry. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, or the seasons shift into a long, dry summer, the moss on our granite stone may begin to change. It loses its soft, spongy texture and turns into something brittle and brown. To a casual observer, it might look as though the life has left it entirely, as if the forest floor has lost a small piece of its green heart. But this is not death. It is a profound and ancient form of patience. Scientists often call these resurrection plants because of their incredible ability to return from a state that looks like the end of all things. While most garden plants or trees will wilt and die if they lose even a small percentage of their internal water, many mosses can survive being completely desiccated. They can lose nearly all the moisture in their cells, becoming as dry as the air around them, and remain in that state for months or even years at a time. In this deep sleep, their biological processes slow down to an almost imperceptible crawl. They are not growing, but they are also not decaying. They are simply waiting. Some mosses have been known to survive in this dried-out state for decades. They become so brittle that they could crumble into dust if you were to press them between your fingers. Yet the blueprint of their life remains perfectly intact, locked away in a cellular vault. The moss has developed special proteins and sugars that act like a glass-like shield, protecting its delicate internal structures from collapsing as the water vanishes. It is a state of suspended animation, a quiet holding of breath that allows the moss to endure conditions that would be fatal to almost any other form of life. The transformation that happens when the water finally returns is one of the most beautiful sights in the natural world. Imagine a single drop of rain falling onto that brown, dusty patch of moss. As the water touches the parched leaves, they begin to unfurl almost instantly. It is not a slow growth like a seed sprouting. It is a rapid, physical reawakening. Within seconds of being rehydrated, the moss begins to turn green again. Its cells plump up, its structures straighten, and it starts the process of photosynthesis almost immediately, sometimes in as little as 20 minutes. It is a biological reset button, allowing the plant to go from appearing dead to being fully productive in the time it takes for a short afternoon shower to pass through the trees. This extraordinary resilience is what allows mosses to conquer some of the harshest landscapes on our planet. You can find them tucked into the cracks of scorching desert rocks where the sun beats down for months without a single cloud in the sky. They can endure the heat and the dryness because they know how to wait, and they know how to wake up the moment the environment becomes kind again. This theme of survival and patience is woven into the very fibers of the moss, making it a guardian of the earth in ways we are only beginning to understand. It isn't just a small plant on a stone, it is a master of time, holding its breath until the world is ready to support life once more. And as we look closer at this resilience, we see that it doesn't just protect the moss itself, but serves as a vital shield for the very ground it covers, acting as a gentle, living blanket for the entire earth. Imagine for a moment that we are lifting our gaze from this single mossy stone and looking out across the vast rolling expanses of the far north. Here, the moss is no longer just a decoration for a rock. It is the architect of the entire landscape. In these cold, quiet regions, moss acts as the Earth's natural insulation, a thick green duvet that covers the ground for thousands of miles. It is a soft, springy layer that does much more than provide a bed for the wandering caribou. It is a guardian of the frozen world beneath it. In the Arctic, the ground is often permanently frozen, a layer known as permafrost. This frozen earth holds ancient secrets and vast amounts of carbon locked away in the ice for millennia. But as the summer sun hangs long and low in the sky, it beats down with a surprising intensity. This is where the moss performs its most vital duty. Because moss is so porous and holds so much air within its tiny leaves and branches, it acts as a perfect thermal blanket. Just as a thick sweater keeps your body heat in, the moss keeps the external heat out. It shields the frozen ground from the warmth of the sun, ensuring that the permafrost remains solid and stable even during the height of the summer thaw. It is a living barrier, standing between the fragile ice and the warming sky. Without this protective layer, the delicate balance of the northern world would begin to unravel. If the moss is disturbed or removed, the dark soil beneath is exposed to the direct heat of the sun. The ice within the ground begins to melt, and the solid earth turns into a soft, shifting mud. This can cause the very trees to tilt and lean in strange directions, a phenomenon sometimes called drunken forests. But more importantly, the melting permafrost releases gases that have been stored for ages. The moss is the gatekeeper, the silent sentry that keeps those gases tucked safely away, maintaining the coolness of the earth and the stability of the air we breathe. In many of these northern ecosystems, the survival of everything, from the smallest insects to the largest herds of reindeer, depends on this unassuming carpet of green. If the moss were to vanish, the entire foundation of the ecosystem would collapse. It is a humbling thought to realize that such a small, rootless plant carries the weight of such a massive responsibility. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't grow tall or loud. It simply sits there, day after day, year after year, cradling the frozen earth in its soft embrace. This global impact reminds us that nothing in nature is truly small. Every patch of moss we see, whether it is on a stone in our backyard or stretching across the Siberian tundra, is part of a grand interconnected system that keeps our world in balance. As we settle deeper into our own rest, we can find comfort in the thought of the massive, quiet shield. The moss is working even while we sleep, buffering the temperature, protecting the soil, and ensuring that the earth remains a hospitable place for life to flourish. It is a reminder that strength doesn't always look like iron or stone. Sometimes the greatest strength is found in the softest, most patient things. And as this living blanket looks after the ground beneath it, it also looks upward, sensing the very air that moves through the forest, acting as a silent witness to the health of our atmosphere. Take a moment now to shift your focus from the vast frozen plains of the north back to the quiet, immediate space around you. Imagine for a moment the specific and refreshing scent of a forest just after a gentle rain shower has passed through. It is the smell of damp earth, of wet stone, and of clean washed air. This scent, often called petrichor, is the earth's way of breathing out, releasing the musk of the soil and the sweetness of the vegetation. As you imagine this cool, moist air entering your lungs, feel your chest rise and fall in a slow, natural rhythm. There is no rush. The forest is patient, and the air is clear. In this clean, post-rain atmosphere, the lichens on our stone are at their most active. While the moss protects the ground, the lichen acts as a silent guardian of the sky. Scientists often refer to lichens as bioindicators, which is a beautiful way of saying they are living storytellers of the air's health. Because lichens do not have a root system to draw nutrients from the soil, and because they lack the protective waxy coating that many larger plants have, they are entirely dependent on the atmosphere for their survival. They drink in the fog, the rain, and even the microscopic dust particles carried on the wind. This means that lichens absorb everything that the air holds, including the things we cannot see. They are like tiny living sponges for the atmosphere, soaking up every molecule that drifts their way. In a pristine forest, far from the reach of industry, lichens flourish in a riot of colors. Bright yellows, deep oranges, and pale seafoam greens. They thrive because the air is pure, providing them with only the clean water and minerals they need to grow their slow, patient patterns across the rocks. They are a physical manifestation of the air's quality, a visible sign that the environment is in balance. However, this incredible ability to absorb the air also makes them very sensitive. Because they take in everything without a filter, they are often the first organisms to react when the chemistry of the air begins to change. They soak up pollutants, heavy metals, and chemicals that might be floating on the breeze. In many large cities or industrial areas, you might notice that the tree trunks and stones are strangely bare, lacking the colorful crusts of lichen you find in the deep woods. Scientists call these areas lichen deserts. It isn't that the stones are too hard or the trees too smooth. It is simply that the air is too heavy for the lichens to breathe. One of the most significant things lichens tell us is the level of sulfur dioxide in the environment. For many decades, researchers have used the presence or absence of certain lichen species to map out air quality. If the lichens disappear from a city, it is a quiet, natural warning that sulfur dioxide levels are high. These hardy organisms, which can survive the vacuum of space and the freezing temperatures of the poles, are humbled by the invisible gases of human activity. When they do return to a city, creeping back onto the bark of park trees or the edges of old stone walls, it is a joyous sign that the air is becoming cleaner and more hospitable for all living things. As you lie there, drifting closer to sleep, think of the lichens as the lungs of the forest floor. They are constantly sampling the world around them, interacting with the very air that moves softly through the trees and into your window. They don't struggle against the environment, they simply exist within it, reflecting its health in their very fibers. There is a profound peace in knowing that these small, colorful patches are watching over the quality of the world we breathe, standing as silent witnesses to the purity of the wind. The relationship between the lichen and the atmosphere is one of total intimacy, a constant exchange that reminds us how deeply connected every breath is to the world outside. And as the air cools and the night grows still, we can trust in these ancient organisms to continue their quiet work, sifting through the silver moonlight and the evening mist, waiting for the morning air to bring them life once more. Leaving the dry, textured surface of the lichen-covered stones, we travel now into a different landscape, one where the ground itself is soft, dark, and eternally damp. Imagine walking into a vast open wetland where the air smells of wet earth and ancient rain. Here, a single type of moss reigns supreme, shaping the very world it lives in. This is the world of sphagnum, or peat moss, a plant that has been quietly rewriting the history of our planet for thousands of years. As you step onto this ground, your feet sink into a deep, spongy carpet. Sphagnum moss is a master of its environment. It doesn't just grow in the water, it controls it. These mosses have a unique ability to release hydrogen ions, which makes the surrounding water highly acidic. This acidity, combined with the way the moss packs tightly together to keep out oxygen, creates a place where the normal rules of decay simply do not apply. In a peat bog, time seems to pause. The usual cycle of things breaking down and returning to the earth is slowed to a near total halt. Because of this lack of oxygen and the natural acidity of the moss, the bog becomes a perfect preservative, much like a gentle natural pickling process. Objects that fall into the deep layers of peat can remain unchanged for centuries and even millennia. This is how we have found bog bodies. Ancient people who were naturally mummified by the moss so perfectly that their skin, hair, and even the expressions on their faces remain visible today. It is a quiet, somber kind of magic. The moss cradles the past, holding on to history with a soft but firm grip, protecting the stories of those who walked these lands thousands of years ago. It is as if the moss refuses to let anything be forgotten, keeping the world's secrets safe beneath its emerald surface. When you touch the surface of a peat bog, you are touching a living bridge to the Iron Age, a cool and quiet archive of everything that has come before. But the influence of sphagnum moss goes far beyond its role as a historian. Though it may look like a simple, low-growing plant, it is one of the most powerful tools the Earth has for regulating its climate. Peat bogs are incredible carbon sinks. As the moss grows and dies, it doesn't rot. Instead, it layers upon itself, trapping carbon within its structure. You might find it hard to believe, but these quiet, soggy peat bogs store more carbon than all the world's forests combined. Every square inch of this moss is doing the heavy lifting for the entire planet, locking away carbon that would otherwise warm the atmosphere. It is a massive, global cooling system, built one tiny moss leaf at a time. This humble plant, growing in the coldest and wettest corners of the world, is a silent hero in the story of our environment. As you breathe slowly and feel your own weight sinking into your bed, think of the immense power held within the softness of the peat. It is a landscape of profound stillness and deep, dark history. The moss is not just a plant, it is a guardian of the past and a protector of our future. It teaches us that there is strength in staying soft, and that by simply existing, year after year, layer after layer, even the smallest of things can change the course of the world. The bog is a place of peace, where the water is still, the air is cool, and the moss continues its ancient, silent work of holding the earth together, layering the present over the past in a never-ending emerald embrace. From the deep, still layers of the peat bog, let your mind drift upward now, leaving the dark, ancient waters behind. Imagine your awareness rising through the cool forest air, past the ferns and the low-hanging branches, until you reach the gentle swaying of the upper canopy. Here, the relationship between the moss on the ground and the life in the trees becomes one of tender, quiet craftsmanship. We often think of architecture as something made of stone or wood, but in the world of the forest, there is a softer kind of building. As you settle deeper into your pillow, imagine a small bird, perhaps a chickadee or a titmouse, flitting silently across the forest floor. It is looking for the perfect material to line its home. It doesn't just want any plant, it is searching for the lush, velvet cushions of moss we have been exploring. Many species of birds depend on moss to create the soft architecture of their nests. To a bird, a patch of moss is not just a plant. It is a source of insulation and a promise of comfort for the next generation. As the bird weaves its nest, it tucks small tufts of moss into the framework of twigs and grass. This isn't just for comfort. Moss is an incredible natural insulator. Because of its complex, branching structure, it traps tiny pockets of air, much like the down feathers on the bird's own chest. This layer of moss creates a thermal blanket, keeping the delicate eggs warm and protected from the biting chill of a spring night. It is a quiet, natural technology used for millions of years to ensure that life continues in the face of the elements. But the choice of moss is even more clever than it first appears. It isn't just about warmth. It is also about health. Scientists have discovered that many mosses possess natural antibacterial and antifungal properties. When a bird lines its nest with these green carpets, it is creating a sterile environment for its chicks. These chemical compounds, which the moss uses to protect itself from decay in the damp forest, serve a second purpose here. They help shield vulnerable hatchlings from parasites and infections during their first few weeks of life. It is as if the forest provides a built-in medicine cabinet woven directly into the walls of the nursery. If you look even closer at the very smallest of nests, you might see the work of the hummingbird. The hummingbird's nest is a marvel of miniature engineering, often no larger than half a walnut shell. To make this tiny cup disappear into the scenery, the hummingbird uses the lichens we spoke of earlier. It carefully gathers flakes of pale green and gray lichen, sticking them to the outside of the nest with strands of spider silk. This creates a perfect camouflage, making the nest look like nothing more than a natural knot or a bump on a lichen-covered branch. To a predator's eye, the nest is invisible, hidden in plain sight by the dusty textures of the lichen. It is a beautiful, symbiotic dance. The bird relies on the plant for survival, and the plant finds a home high in the sunlit branches. This connection reminds us that even the smallest, most humble organisms on the forest floor play a vital role in the lives of the creatures that soar above them. The moss and the lichen are not just decorations. They are the quiet, essential foundations of life, providing warmth, protection, and safety in the great green expanse of the woods. As you breathe in and out, imagine the softness of that moss-lined nest, a perfect, quiet cradle swaying gently in the breeze, holding the future in its emerald arms. Just as the birds recognize the quiet value of the moss, humans too have a long and storied history with these humble plants. For centuries, we have looked to the forest floor not just for beauty, but for survival, for healing, and for craft. There is a deep ancestral wisdom in the way we have learned to use what the earth provides, recognizing that even the smallest organisms possess extraordinary properties. When we walk through a quiet wood, we are walking through a living library of human ingenuity, where every patch of green and every crust of lichen has at some point played a role in our own story. Consider the peat moss or sphagnum, which we find in the damp, mist-shrouded hollows of the forest. During the difficult years of the First World War, when medical supplies like cotton were desperately scarce, doctors and nurses looked toward the wetlands for a solution. They found that sphagnum moss was not just a substitute for cotton, it was, in many ways, a superior surgical dressing. This moss is naturally antiseptic, containing compounds that naturally inhibit the growth of bacteria, creating a sterile environment for healing. But perhaps its most remarkable quality is its incredible thirst. Sphagnum moss can absorb up to 20 times its own weight in liquid, nearly 4 times more than the finest cotton of the time. In the hushed, busy halls of field hospitals, this quiet plant from the bog saved countless lives, keeping wounds clean and dry with its soft, natural embrace. It is a humbling thought to imagine a soldier's recovery aided by the very same moss that cushions the roots of an ancient cedar. And then there are the lichens, those slow-growing mosaics of fungi and algae that cling to the bark and the stones. While they might look like nothing more than dusty patches of gray or pale mint, they hide a secret world of color within their chemical structures. For hundreds of years, humans have harvested lichens to create vibrant, lasting textile dyes. In the rugged landscapes of the Scottish Highlands, the traditional wools of the Harris tweed were once dyed almost exclusively with crottle. a local name for certain species of lichen. By carefully gathering these organisms and boiling them in large iron pots, craftspeople could extract deep, earthy reds, warm, sun-baked oranges, and rich, regal purples that would never fade, even after decades of wear. It is a beautiful, slow process, one that requires a deep patience, mirroring the slow growth of the lichen itself. A single garment might hold the colors of a colony that took 50 years to grow on a cold granite boulder. This relationship between humans and the forest floor is one of quiet respect and observation. We have learned to see the extraordinary potential in the smallest of things, connecting our own lives to the rhythmic cycles of the woods. Whether it is the healing touch of a moss bandage or the vibrant hue of a lichen-dyed cloak, these organisms remind us that we are part of a much larger interconnected system. As you settle deeper into your covers, imagine the hands of those who came before us, reaching down to the damp earth to gather these gifts. There is a profound sense of peace in knowing that the forest has always provided what was needed, offered in total silence, waiting only for us to notice. The moss and the lichen continue their work today, just as they have for millennia, growing in the shadows, holding the history of the world in their emerald and ashen fibers. As the forest settles into the evening, a profound stillness begins to descend, as if the very ground itself is preparing for a undisturbed rest. If you have ever stepped into the heart of an ancient old-growth forest, the kind where the trees are giants and the ground is a rolling sea of emerald, you might have noticed a change in the very quality of the air. It is as if you have stepped through an invisible door into a room lined with heavy plush velvet. The world outside seems to vanish, and a profound, heavy silence settles over everything. This isn't merely a trick of the imagination or the result of being far from the noise of a city. It is a physical reality crafted by the very plants beneath your feet. Moss is one of nature's most incredible sound absorbers. While we often think of it as a simple, decorative carpet, it functions more like high-tech acoustic insulation. This is because of the intricate way moss is built. If you were to look closely at a single patch of moss, you would see millions of tiny, delicate leaves and stems, all branching out and overlapping in a complex, three-dimensional web. Between these miniature structures are countless microscopic pockets of air hidden within the dense green thicket. When a sound wave travels through the forest, perhaps the sharp crack of a falling branch or the rustle of a breeze through the high canopy, it eventually strikes the moss. On a hard, flat surface like a bare rock or a paved road, that sound wave would bounce off and echo, continuing its journey across the landscape. But the moss acts like a sponge for noise. The sound enters the porous layers of the moss and is scattered in 1,000 different directions. It bounces from leaf to leaf, losing energy with every collision, until it is finally muffled into nothingness. The moss literally traps the sound waves, swallowing the noise of the world and turning it into a faint, undetectable whisper. This is the scientific reason why a mossy forest feels so much quieter and more private than an open field or a grassy meadow. In a wide open space, sound can travel for vast distances, carried by the wind and reflected by the hard, flat earth. But In a forest draped in green, the environment is hushed and intimate. The moss creates a sanctuary, a quiet zone where the chaos of the world cannot penetrate. It creates a space for deep reflection, where the only sounds that remain are the ones close to you, the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing and the gentle, rhythmic beating of your heart. Imagine walking through this space now. Every step you take is perfectly cushioned, the sound of your footfall absorbed instantly by the damp, springy earth. The air feels heavy and still held in place by the millions of tiny green fingers of the moss. It is a comforting weight, like a warm blanket pulled up to your chin on a cold night. In this silence, your mind can finally begin to let go of the day's worries. The forest has taken those loud, clattering thoughts and muffled them, wrapping them in emerald velvet until they are nothing more than a faint, distant memory. As you rest in this imagined quiet, you might notice that the moss doesn't just stay on the floor. It is a traveler, a slow-moving explorer that seeks out the best places to thrive. From the soft, silent carpet of the earth, your gaze might naturally drift upward, following the moss as it begins to climb. It finds its way onto the roots and the trunks of the trees, tracing the deep ridges of the bark like a living map. It has a particular way of choosing where to grow, a silent logic that has helped it survive for hundreds of millions of years, turning the trees themselves into pillars of soft, green history. As we look up from the stones and the soil, we begin to see how the moss connects the earth to the sky. As your gaze follows the moss upward, leaving the cool, damp stones of the forest floor behind, you begin to see how this green life forms a bridge between the earth and the sky. The moss doesn't simply stop at the base of a tree. It begins an incredibly slow, patient journey up the trunk. To our eyes, the bark of an old oak or a towering maple might look like a rough, weathered surface, but to the moss, it is a vertical landscape of mountains and ridges, full of hidden crevices where moisture can linger. It is a slow-motion ascent that takes decades, a quiet reclaiming of the vertical world. There is a well-known piece of folklore that says you can always find your way out of a forest by looking at the moss, because it only grows on the north side of the trees. While nature is rarely that perfectly uniform, there is a beautiful scientific truth behind the myth. In the northern hemisphere, the sun spends its day in the southern sky, casting its warmest, most drying rays onto the southern faces of the trees. The north side, however, remains in a constant cool shadow. For a plant that has no deep roots to drink from the soil and no thick, waxy skin to keep from drying out, this shade is a sanctuary. The moss chooses the north side because it is a place of peace, where the dampness of the morning dew can last just a little bit longer into the afternoon. It is a natural compass, written in shades of emerald and forest green, guiding not just the traveler, but the very life of the woods. As the moss wraps itself around the tree, it creates a living partnership that benefits both the giant and the small. You might worry that the moss is taking something from the tree, but it is not a parasite. It doesn't tap into the tree's sap or steal its energy. Instead, it acts more like a soft, protective garment. Within the thick velvet layers of the moss, a whole world of beneficial insects finds a home. These dainty creatures, some so small they are nearly invisible, act as a sort of cleaning crew for the tree. They patrol the bark, eating harmful fungi and tiny pests that might otherwise damage the tree's outer layer. The tree provides the moss with a sturdy place to stand, high above the hungry mouths of forest floor dwellers, and in return, the moss provides a nursery for the tree's tiny protectors. It is a quiet, ancient agreement, signed in the stillness of the woods. If you look even higher, into the swaying branches of the upper canopy, you might see clumps of moss hanging like soft green lanterns from the limbs. These are the epiphytes, plants that live their entire lives without ever touching the ground. Up there, far above the soil, these mosses have learned to survive on what the air provides. They are masters of the mist. When the clouds descend or the morning fog rolls through the forest, the epiphytic mosses spread their tiny leaves to catch the floating droplets. They act as filters, trapping microscopic particles of dust and minerals that are carried on the wind. They drink from the sky itself, turning the ghost-like vapor of the clouds into solid, vibrant life. From this height, the forest looks different. The moss connects everything from the deepest root to the highest leaf, weaving the individual trees into a single, unified organism. As you watch the soft green patches sway gently in the breeze high above, you might notice that not all moss looks the same. Up close, the textures begin to change. Some are round and plump, others are delicate and feathery, each one adapted to its own tiny corner of the world. Each variety has its own way of holding the light and the water, and each has a name as charming and quiet as the plant itself. As you look closer at the green tapestry at your feet, you begin to see that this is not just one single texture. It is a collection of individuals, each with a name that sounds like it belongs in a storybook or a quiet, well-loved home. These names, pincushion moss, fern moss, carpet moss, reflect the wonderful variety of shapes and styles that have evolved over millions of years. Each one has a personality, a specific way of greeting the sun and holding the rain. Take a moment to imagine the pincushion moss. It grows in tight, rounded mounds that look like small velvet pillows scattered across the forest floor or perched on the roots of an old oak. These mounds are often a soft, silvery green, almost glowing in the dim light of the understory. This shape is a masterpiece of natural engineering. By huddling together in a dense, hemispherical dome, the moss minimizes the amount of its body that is exposed to the open air. This leads us to our 77th fact. Pincushion moss grows in these tight, round mounds specifically to conserve moisture. In the dry air, the outer leaves may curl inward slightly, creating a protective barrier that traps a reservoir of humidity deep inside the cushion. It is a self-contained oasis, a tiny living sponge that refuses to let go of the water it needs to survive. When you imagine resting a finger against it, it feels firm, yet yielding, like a cushion designed for the smallest forest creatures to find their rest. Moving your gaze just a few inches away, perhaps tucked into the humid shadow of a decaying log, you might find a patch of fern moss. This variety offers a completely different landscape for the eye to wander through. Fact 78 is that fern moss looks like a miniature version of a prehistoric forest. Its tiny, delicate branches divide and subdivide into lacy fronds that perfectly mimic the structure of a full-sized fern. If you were to shrink down until you were no larger than a ladybug. Standing beneath a single frond of fern moss would feel like being in a vast, ancient wilderness. The way it catches the light creates a play of shadows and highlights that gives the forest floor a sense of immense depth and mystery. It is a world within a world, a reminder that grandeur does not always require great size. It thrives in the stillness, its delicate lace untroubled by the heavy winds that sway the trees above. Then there is the carpet moss, which lives up to its name by spreading out in long, flat, golden green sheets. It drapes itself over stones and fallen branches, smoothing out the rough edges of the world like a soft, living blanket. It doesn't seek to stand out or form high mounds. It simply wants to cover the earth in a seamless layer of protection, following the contours of the land with a quiet, humble grace. Every one of these shapes, the mounds, the fronds, the sheets, is a testament to Fact 79. Each shape is an adaptation to its specific micro niche. In the forest, space is precious, and every square inch has a different level of light, a different amount of wind, and a different way of catching the rain. The pincushion moss might choose a spot where the air is a bit drier, relying on its rounded shape to stay hydrated. The fern moss might seek out the deepest, most humid shadows where its delicate fronds won't wither. The carpet moss might prefer the flat surface of a rock where it can spread its tiny anchors wide and catch every passing drop of mist. As you appreciate this aesthetic variety, you can feel the harmony of the forest. There is no competition here, only a quiet, efficient use of space where every plant has found its perfect home. The silver of the pincushion, the deep emerald of the fern, and the bright lime green of the carpet all blend together into a mosaic of peace. It is a reminder that there are many ways to thrive and many different ways to belong. You can feel the weight of your body pressing into your own soft surface now, much like the moss presses against the earth, finding your own micro niche of comfort and stillness as the forest breathes around you in the dark. Beyond the wild, untamed forest, there is a place where humans have long sought to capture this same sense of stillness. We move from the ancient woods into the quiet, walled gardens of the East, where the art of moss gardening has been perfected over many centuries. It is an intentional stillness, a deliberate way of inviting the peace of the forest into the heart of a home. Fact 80 is that Japanese Zen gardens have used moss for over 1,000 years to represent age and peace. In places like the famous Saihoji Temple in Kyoto, often called the Moss Temple, over 120 varieties of moss carpet the ground beneath the maple trees. To the monks who walk these paths, the moss is much more than a plant. It is a symbol of the eternal. Its slow, steady spread across the earth and over the roots of trees suggests a world that is ancient and undisturbed. When you look at a garden blanketed in moss, you aren't just seeing green. You're seeing the weight of 1,000 years held in a single soft breath. It is a visual representation of silence itself. This leads us to Fact 81. Moss represents the beauty of wabi-sabi, a Japanese philosophy centered on the acceptance of transience and imperfection. In the eyes of wabi-sabi, there is a profound beauty in things that are weathered by time and the elements. A stone is not just a stone, it is considered more beautiful when it is covered in a velvet layer of moss, showing its age and its history. Moss embodies the idea that nothing is ever truly finished, nothing is perfect, and nothing lasts forever. And in that realization, there is a deep, abiding peace. It teaches us to appreciate the cracks in the pavement, the rust on a gate, and the faded colors of the autumn leaves, for they are the marks of a life well lived. In the garden, the moss covers the sharp edges of reality, softening the world until it feels safe and gentle. Fact 82 is that tending to moss requires a level of patience and a gentle touch that is rare in our modern world. You cannot rush moss. You cannot force it to grow faster with chemicals or aggressive pruning. To care for a moss garden is to enter a different state of mind entirely. It involves gently misting the emerald cushions in the cool of the morning and perhaps picking away a single fallen needle with a pair of bamboo tweezers so as not to disturb the delicate structures beneath. It is a meditative practice, a slow-motion conversation between the gardener and the earth. In this garden there is no noise, no hurry, and no demand for results. There is only the presence of the green, growing in its own time and in its own way. As you imagine yourself walking through such a garden now, you can feel the air becoming cooler and more still. Your footsteps are entirely silent on the soft, damp path. There is a sense that time here has slowed down to a crawl, matching the patient pace of the moss itself. You are no longer concerned with the worries of the day or the tasks of tomorrow. Like the stones in the garden, you are simply here resting under the gentle weight of time. The moss doesn't ask anything of you. It only offers its softness, inviting you to let go of the need for perfection and simply be. The world outside may be fast and loud, but here, in the shade of the ancient trees, everything is muted, weathered, and beautiful in its quiet, slow transition. You can feel your breath evening out, slow and steady, as you sink deeper into this landscape of emerald peace. As we stand in this quiet garden, looking down at a single moss-covered stone, we might think of it as something eternal. To our eyes, the stone is the definition of permanence, a fixed point in a world that is always changing. But in the long, slow gaze of the forest, even the hardest rock is in a state of soft, gentle transition. The moss and the lichen are the patient sculptors of this landscape, working on a scale of time that far outlasts a human life. Fact 83. Eventually, the moss and lichen will turn the stone back into dust. It is a slow, patient dismantling that happens beneath the emerald carpet. The acid secreted by the lichen and the tiny searching rhizids of the moss find the invisible cracks in the minerals, prying them apart, atom by atom. What was once a jagged piece of mountain or a heavy slab of granite becomes, over the eons, a handful of fine, dark earth. It is not a violent process, but a quiet one, a steady, rhythmic softening of the world. The moss doesn't destroy the stone, it simply coaxes it back into the earth, one microscopic grain at a time. Fact 84. This dust, this broken down stone, will feed the next generation of wildflowers and trees. The minerals that once sat locked inside the cold, silent granite are released into the soil, becoming the building blocks for the roots of a giant oak or the petals of a delicate wood anemone. The stone does not truly disappear. It simply changes its form, moving from the stillness of the mineral kingdom into the living, breathing canopy of the forest. In this way, the moss and lichen act as the vital bridge between the ancient past and the living future. They take the old and the heavy and turn it into the new and the light. Fact 85. It is a cycle that takes thousands of years, happening in total silence. There are no machines, no grinding gears, and no clamor in this transformation. Only the sound of the wind through the high leaves and the occasional drop of rain hitting the forest floor. It is a reminder that the most profound changes in our world do not require noise or hurry. They happen in the spaces between the seconds, in the long, dark hours of the night when the rest of the world is at rest. This cycle of stone becoming soil and soil becoming life is as steady and reliable as the rising of the moon. It is a process that has been occurring since the very first plants crawled onto the shore, and it will continue long after we have closed our eyes. As you settle further into your pillows, let the weight of this ancient timeline wash over you. You are part of a world that knows how to take its time, a world that values the slow and the steady over the fast and the loud. There is no need to rush toward the morning, just as the moss does not rush to break the stone. Everything is happening exactly as it should, in its own season and at its own pace. The forest is cradling the earth, and you are being cradled by the stillness of the room around you. The cycle continues, quiet and sure, guiding you toward a deep and effortless rest. The stone is resting, the moss is growing, and you are drifting closer to the edge of sleep. Take one more slow, deep breath, feeling the cool air fill your lungs before you release it in a long, effortless sigh. The forest around us has grown truly dark now. The canopy above is a silhouette against the starlight, and down here on the forest floor, the world is draped in shadows and soft textures. The moss, which we have followed through its ancient history and its microscopic wonders, is doing what it has done for millions of years. It is simply being. It is cradling the roots of the trees, cushioning the weight of the fallen branches, and hugging the cold, hard surface of the stones. In this darkness, the green color of the moss has deepened into a rich, velvety, black green, a color that seems to absorb the silence of the night. Fact 86. Mosses do not sleep in the way that humans or animals do, but they enter profound states of rest. Without the sun to power their photosynthesis, their internal chemistry shifts. Their metabolic rhythm slows down, entering a state of quiet stasis. They are not inactive, but they are profoundly still, waiting for the return of the light. This biological peace is a form of deep patience, a way of conserving every bit of energy until the conditions for growth return. Just as your body is now slowing its heart rate and softening its muscles, the moss is settling into its own version of a nightly recovery. It is a reminder that everything in nature requires this period of withdrawal, this time to step back from the activity of the day and exist in the restorative embrace of the dark. Fact 87. As the night deepens and the air cools, the moss waits patiently for the arrival of the morning dew. Because mosses lack roots to pull water from deep underground, they are masters of the atmosphere. They wait for the moment when the invisible moisture in the air condenses into tiny, sparkling droplets on the tips of their leaves. This dew is their lifeblood, a gift from the cooling night air. They do not struggle or search for it. They simply remain open and ready to receive it. There is a great peace in this kind of waiting, a trust that the environment will provide exactly what is needed when the time is right. As you drift toward sleep, you can adopt this same quiet trust. The rest you need is coming to you as naturally and inevitably as the dew settling on the forest floor. The image of that single emerald-covered stone remains in the mind's eye, a small, perfect world of its own, enduring through the centuries. It has seen the rise and fall of seasons, the passing of ancient animals, and the slow, steady turning of the stars. It is a symbol of resilience, of softness, overcoming hardness, and of the beauty that can be found in the smallest, quietest corners of our world. The moss and the lichen will be there when the sun rises, and they will be there when it sets again, continuing their silent work of turning stone into soil and life into legacy. They are the elders of the plant world, and they have much to teach us about the value of being still, of being patient, and of being enough exactly as we are. The forest is quiet now, and the air is still. The moss is tucked around the earth like a living quilt, keeping the world beneath it cool and protected. You are safe within this stillness, part of the same ancient rhythm that guides the moss and the stones. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to learn, and nowhere else you need to be. The journey through the miniature forest is complete, and the path ahead leads only into the soft, dark landscape of your dreams. May your rest be as deep as the roots of the ancient trees and as peaceful as the moss on a midnight stone. Sleep now, surrounded by the quiet wisdom of the earth. Sleep well, sleep in peace.